there's so much information to go. Okay, we are live. I got the thumbs up from David. I welcome those that are joining us online as we continue the Science in the Bible. And tonight's lesson is Harmony of Science in the Bible, Part 1. We got Part 2 next week. Tonight we're looking at Physics and Astronomy. In Psalms 19, verse 1, we read, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." We don't begin to realize what God shows us every day. And when we consider the universe itself, and especially as we get into the science of it all, I'm going to have a video here, and a short video here in a few minutes. When we understand how fragile the universe itself is, that the universe, the existence of the universe as we understand it, is a huge miracle, much less life itself. We've only begun to appreciate the mighty God we serve. In Romans 1:19 and 20, Paul writes, he says, "Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them." God has revealed himself in some form or fashion to everyone. I'm sorry, that's what my scripture says. And he says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so they are without excuse." People want to explain away God with millions of years and evolution and ungodly theology out there. And the things that we're going to be exploring throughout this series are the various wonders that God may try, and they may try to explain what has happened by some cosmic accident in millions and billions of years. But when we look at the Bible, and I need to review this with you, the purpose of this series, as we look at the Scriptures, we know that the Scriptures is not a history book or a book of science. But when it mentions those things, we can trust every word of the Bible. The Bible claims to be the very inspired Word of God. And if some of it isn't true, which parts of it do we throw out and which parts of it do we believe? It's either all true and we accept it all, or we're just going to have to disregard it all. But we can understand, and we need to trust the things of science that are in here and the things of history. And over again, and I'll be mentioning a couple of these things tonight, where science had it wrong, the Bible's had it right. All along. And we're still finding that out even today. So therefore we conclude that although the Bible is not a science book, it is accurate in everything that it speaks of. Tonight we're going to look at physics. And first of all, and as we look at physics, we need to understand there are some laws, or natural laws, if you will. There are some things that we cannot suspend. We cannot get around, that we're all subject to, whether we like it or not. These laws are from God. Now, there's a little cartoon that says it says, "I think you should be a little more specific here in step 2, then a miracle occurs." You need to understand miracles. What is a miracle? A miracle is the temporary suspension of natural laws. And we must remember that God Almighty isn't just simply above the laws he created. He is outside those laws. He controls the laws. He sets those laws in place. And when we consider the law of physics, or natural law as we understand it, and we look at the immensity of the universe, we have to consider matter and energy. Now, I'm going to be getting into that in a couple of sessions, talking about the creation itself. But as a reminder, where we were last week, we have to remember that true science is the study of what is, number one, observable, something that you can see or measure, if you will. Number 2, demonstratable or testable, if you will. We can see it and we can demonstrate it. And then number 3, repeatable. In other words, there are certain consistencies that we observe. This is science, observable, demonstratable, repeatable. And it's from these observations and demonstrations of various phenomena that we have come to see that there are four major concepts in science. Hypothesis, yeah, what you said. Okay, I got it. Pardon my lips here. Theories, laws, and facts. Now, through scientific laws and theories are supported by a large body of empirical data accepted by the majority of scientists within a area of scientific studies. And to help unify it, we got to understand these things are not the same. Hypothesis, theories, facts, and laws are kind of like apples, oranges, and kumquats. They're different. We have to understand. One cannot necessarily grow into another, no matter how much fertilizer and water is offered, okay? They don't necessarily change. This is according to the University of California. For instance, a hypothesis, okay, you got it right, so bear with me. It is simply a limited explanation of phenomena that we observe in nature. It's why does this happen, and it's somebody's guess, okay? It's just simply, it's kind of thrown out there. There's a limited explanation. Then a scientific theory is an in-depth explanation of the observed phenomenon. Now, understand, it's based upon the observed phenomenon. Now, you hear about the theory of evolution. How can evolution even be a theory by this definition? Because it's based upon observed phenomenon. There have been no phenomenon or event in evolution that has ever been observed. It has never been observed or recorded, one species changing into another. It has never been observed. So how can we say evolution is even a theory? It's a hypothesis at best. Yes, it's that at best, okay? At best. And then we have laws. Laws are descriptions, and oftentimes it's mathematical, if you will. And you'll see some of this here in a moment. They're mathematical description of natural phenomenon. For instance, Newton's law of gravity or Newton's law of motion. You know, an object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon an outside force. That's a law. We know it. It's observable, it's demonstratable, it's repeatable. We know this. It is a law. It doesn't say why things are that way, but a law is a detailed description of what is known to be certain here. And then the last item are scientific facts. These are data points. These are measurements. These are undisputed measurements of phenomenon from which all the above are based upon. So, having said that, natural laws, our law of physics, are assumed to be constant. Assumed to be constant. Now, why do we presume that the way the laws of physics always will work in the future the way they've been observed to work in the past? Think about that. Why should it work in the future? One thing about God, we tend to take uniformity for granted, but this is necessary for science to work. Now, when we look at uniformity in science and especially in physics and in these things, it is not to be conformed with, hang on, bear with me here, uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is the assumption that the way we observe things today is the way it has always been. An example of that is the Grand Canyon is growing by a couple inches every year. So therefore, if you take those couple of inches every year and we look backwards, they say it took millions of years for the Grand Canyon to form based upon inches every year. We're assuming that the way things are happening today happened in the past. And so not to be conformed with the consistency of God and the laws of physics should not be confused with uniformitarianism. More on that in later sessions here. We're going to talk about that. But God's logic and uniformity is built into the universe. It just didn't happen. Now, watch this video. There is some one or two, I'll say theological, questionable items in here, but I'm not going to point them out. But this video has some strong evidence for a creator talking about the constants in physics in the universe. Go ahead and roll it, Dave.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence suggests that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really, 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 really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a superintellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
That's an interesting website to go to, reasonablefaith.org. Check it out sometime. A lot of this in this folks that are interviewed, these were raving atheists, that's a number of them, like Stephen Hawkins and others. And they said, you know, the evidence, you can't ignore the evidence of design in the universe. Now, a lot of this, they're talking about, if you paid attention, even millions of years, but we're going to get to it, especially when I get to the session on the age of the universe. We're going to talk about that there are so many reasons why the universe can't be millions or billions of years old. More on that later. But what did you think? That's astronomical. I mean, it's when we think about it, do you understand when we're talking about 1 part in 60, 1 part in 120? I mean, you know, we're talking, everything is just within a hair's breadth. The miracle that the universe is. And that they believe there's even a Big Bang. That's right. It's a hypothesis at best. Yes. Yes, you got that exactly right. Tonight, I want to just simply, we're not going to look at all of physics, but we're going to look at the laws of thermodynamics. And the law of thermodynamics are among some of the most fundamental laws of the universe created by God, to which everything adheres. Now remember, these are laws. They're not explanations. It's things that are kind of set in stone. We don't know why they are the way they are, but this is the way they are, period. Okay? And there are 4 laws of thermodynamics, and they're numbered 0, 1, 2, and 3. The reason why we have a 0 is this last one came up later after they established the first 3, and they realized that they numbered it 0 because everything else is based upon it. Now, the 0 law, often called the 4th law, since it was recognized after the other 3, gives us the concept of temperature. You understand, with a rise of temperature, you have a rise in energy. And it's also a law of equilibrium. The higher the temperature, the higher the energy. Higher temperatures will flow into lower temperatures. And stated scientifically as a law of equilibrium, and it may sound very simple, but it established the basis for everything else. And it says if two systems are in equilibrium with a third system, they are in equilibrium with each other. Now, that may say, okay, what does that mean? Well, when you, this is not a science class, but you need to hang with me in here. But this is fundamental to everything else. The first law of thermodynamics, that we'll discuss in detail in just a moment, is called the conservation of mass and energy. And the second law, which we'll also discuss, and you'll hear me bring up the first and second law repeatedly throughout this series. The second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy, or the law of dissipating energy. And I'll talk about that more here in a minute. And the third law of thermodynamics deals with the concept of absolute zero. Absolute zero is like a negative 470 some Celsius. What happens at absolute zero is at absolute zero there is zero energy. Zero energy. And so that's overly simplified. It just says if there's no temperature, there is no energy. But we're going to deal with mostly the first and second law of thermodynamics, and we'll certainly concentrate on the second. In Genesis 2, verse 1, it says, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. We tend to read over that and gloss over that, but we need to understand the depth of what's being said here. In this verse, God completed his work of creation. And the universe and all that was in the universe, matter and energy, is done. God put everything together. And that brings us to the first law of thermodynamics, the conservation of mass and energy. The law states that the sum total of all energy in the universe remains constant, but one form of energy may be converted into another. The size, shape, etc. may be changed, but to simply put, energy and matter cannot be created nor destroyed. They just convert from one form to another. And the law teaches that no creation nor destruction of matter and energy is now being accomplished anywhere in the universe. The universe is functioning on that matter and the energy with which it originally began. Now, I'm going to talk more specifics when I talk about creation here in a couple of sessions. And I'm talking in terms of matter and energy. But understand everything that God made and that he said was complete, and then on the sixth day he rested. On the seventh day he rested. At the end of the sixth day, that's all there was. That's all there is. Nothing new is being created, whether it's matter or energy. All that exists must have been created by someone. And because there's not one process in nature that creates anything, whether matter or energy. Nothing. You can't make something from nothing. And in fact, that piece of theology or doctrine is called ex nihilo, and that's just simply Latin for something out of nothing, okay? And only God makes something when there was previously nothing. In fact, and I'll talk more about this later, but the word creation in the Hebrew is the word bara, and that word bara in the Hebrew is only used with God as his subject. Only God creates. Only God creates. Now, what man makes, we don't create anything. We just adjust things. We put it in the different shapes and forms. We make stuff out of stuff that's already been existed. That's like the joke where Jesus and the devil got together, and devil says, I can make anything. And he says, I can make life, and I'm just going to take some dirt. And Jesus says, no, you go make your own dirt. You know, only God creates. And Albert Einstein, he had his famous equation that showed the relationship between matter and energy. You remember what that is? E equals mc squared, where c squared, and we're going to talk about this later, the little c stands for the speed of light squared. Now, there are some significant things associated with the speed of light, and that will be dealt with in a later session, but I want you to keep that in mind. And this law forms the foundation for observable science, whether it's sending rockets up into space or whatever you do. And a simple explanation, and I read this example, I'm going to share it with you, about matter and energy all being changed is, and we did this the other night, we had a fire in our backyard, is roasting a marshmallow. Roasting a marshmallow. Eating roasted marshmallows at a campfire. And it says that, number one, the sun produces energy in the form of heat and light that travels the earth. Trees receive this sunlight energy and uses photosynthesis to convert it to wood. Okay, we grow trees. Then you take the wood from the trees and we convert the wood, the matter, back into energy in the form of heat and light and a fire. Okay, and that heat and fire is transferred to your marshmallow and toast it real nice and easy. And then what do? You muck it down or you make your s'more with it, you know. And when you eat it down, then your body converts that marshmallow back into metabolic, thank you, energy. In other words, calories. We talk calories here. And calories is just a measure of heat, a measure of energy, if you will, when it's digested. And this demonstrates that the total energy in this scenario remains constant. Energy was just simply transformed from one form to another. And we see this in everything. So the first law of thermodynamics then support the Bible because the following scriptures reveal the significance of the law of this law of thermodynamics. Colossians 1, verses 16 and 17. It says, for by him, that is Jesus, by him all things were created that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominion or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him, Jesus, all things consist. And when you look at the Greek, that means everything holds together because of Jesus. I don't think we begin to even comprehend the depth of that statement. And I mentioned this briefly the other day, I think in another session. Do you realize science doesn't understand what holds the atom together? They've been looking for this thing called the Higgs-boson. They had this big collider, particle collider over on the border of France and Switzerland, and they run things together at near the speed of light, and they found this thing that they called the, quote, God particle. But they don't know what holds the atom together. Understand, when you got protons all together, they're all positively charged, but positively charged particles tend to repel from one another. What holds the nucleus together? And the Bible says that in him all things consist. In him all things hold together. Isaiah 40, verse 26, it says, lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things, who bring out their host by number. He calls them by name, by the greatness of his might and the strength of his power. Not one is missing. Everything that's in the universe, it's in its place, is there. And when we consider the mass, the size, the huge magnitude of the universe, that God created it all from nothing. A lot more on that later. Genesis 1:1, you know that one. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And all that God created is still here in one form or another. Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and the earth and all the host of them were finished. Nothing else is being created. All that there is will be until God creates a new heaven and a new earth. Go read Revelation 21. I'll quote from that later. But until then, all that there is in the universe is here. And the fact is, everything in the universe is dying. That brings us to the second law of thermodynamics. Energy dissipates. The scientific word is entropy. Everything within a closed system, when we get to the scientific explanation, everything within a closed system will deteriorate over time. Everything moves from a higher energy level to a lower energy level. Everything will move from order to disorder. Everything corrupts, rusts out, falls apart over time. I got a little 1980 Triumph Spitfire sitting in my garage at home. And it's been sitting there pretty much for a year because I have some alternator problems with it. But just sitting there, it's falling apart just by sitting there. Everything deteriorates over time. Everything will fall apart. Every system in the universe, if left to its own, will move from order to disorder, from high energy or to useless or less energy. And then as we can throw in things, unless acted upon, a closed system acted upon by an outside force. But many times atheists will point out, well, the earth is an open system because we're continually getting energy from the sun. Well, first of all, the sun is dying. More on that later. But understand, if we realize that the whole universe is a closed system, there's nothing new coming into the universe. This means the entire universe is dying. Our sun is dying. And when I get to the session 9, you can look at it on your sheets. I'm going to talk more about that. This is one reason why the universe cannot be millions of years old, nor, and this gets into eschatology, nor will it exist for millions of years more. On both ends of the scales there. Evolution teaches there's an upward trend, increasing complexity and order. It has atoms organizing themselves into more and more complex arrangements. When we realize, and I talked about this our first session, how complex DNA is, that happened by accident. When things mutate, every time they see a mutation, it always results in a loss of information. Never is there a gain in information. Never is there a gain in information. The second law of thermodynamics states just the opposite. There is a downward trend. There is decreasing complexity and order. In fact, the argument, and I will be making it towards the end, we today, the people today, you and I are not the people that were here 6,000 years ago. They talk about giants in the land and everything else. There's reason to believe that Adam and Eve was a whole lot smarter, a whole lot bigger, a whole lot stronger, a whole lot healthier, a whole lot of everything more than we are today. Because over time, we don't have the DNA they have. We look at the mutations and we look at diseases and we look at everything that is out there. We are not the people that were once here. In fact, there's been a loss of information, not a gain of information. And so the quote, an old Star Trek show, Star Trek Next Generation, they had an episode where everybody was de-evolving. Well, there's a lot more truth to that than there is to people evolving into something greater. The Bible reinforces the law of entropy. Psalms 102, verses 25 to 27. And it says, of old you have laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak, you will change them, and they will be changed, but you are the same. Your years have no end. Isaiah 51, verse 6, lift up your eyes to the heaven and look on the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish away like smoke, and the earth will grow old like a garment. Think about a garment, especially in those days. You know, they're not the fine material we have today, but even with the nice materials and stuff we have today, I got some shirts hanging in my closet that are, Ellen's trying to get me to get rid of them, you know, but they're falling apart. They're thread-borne. They wear out. The earth is wearing out like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever. My righteousness will not be abolished. Romans 8. I love Romans 8. Romans 8 is a very rich chapter in the Bible. But look at verses 20 to 22. It says, for the creation was subject to futility, not willing, but because of him, Jesus, who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself will be delivered from the bondage of corruption. Creation itself is subject to corruption, into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labor with birth pangs together until now. The scriptures that I just went through depicts the law of decay and the second law of thermodynamics. That's all they're doing, is describing it. We just got some nice, neat mathematical formulas for all of these things. The term wear out like a garment means to deteriorate or decay through age and use. And the Bible writers picture the total universe as deteriorating from the original state as it ages. Unlike what is taught in many of our schools and universities, the universe will not last forever. The second law of thermodynamics tells us the universe is dying. And the first indication that science had about the universe growing old and was being used up was the discovery of the second law of thermodynamics. That's a law. It is happening. The Bible confirms it. The Bible's been there all along before they even knew about the second law of thermodynamics. The law is almost as significant to science as the first law of thermodynamics. It states that the total amount of useful energy is decreasing to the same degree to which useless energy, now think about that, useless energy is increasing, and the rate is irreversible in its flow. In other words, once the fire burns out, you can't make another fire out of the ashes. Because this law is in effect, no machine can be constructed to 100% efficiency. In other words, perpetual motion. The perpetual motion machines are an impossibility. An outside source of fuel or energy is necessary to keep a machine running. And this law says eventually everything will fall apart or disintegrate. And the law teaches that instead of an upward trend, there is an increase in, there is not an increase in complexity or order, there is a decrease trend. Things are falling apart. Obviously, death and decay were not the original intended to bound us as they do now. When God establishes his eternal kingdom, it will not be so. But before man sinned, put the curse into action, some higher law of perfection and preservation was apparently in effect. And so we'll revisit this law many times over the next couple of weeks. But in Genesis 3:17 to 19, and this is the curse. This is after God called Adam and Eve in their sin. And it says in verse 17, then to Adam he said, that is God, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake, and toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Verse 18, both thorn and thistles it will bring forth for you, and you shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, in the dust you shall return. I got a funeral coming up. We've had a couple of funerals, and we use this, you know. We were dust when we were made. We're dust when we return. Life is limited. Life is limited. But one day all will be restored, not to fall into ruin again. Revelation 21, verse 1. John writes, he says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth has passed away. Also there was no more sea." One day there'll be no law of entropy, but not today. That's where we're at today. Now I want to speak about astronomy. I'm watching our time here, but bear with me here. Considering our uniqueness in the universe. You know, we spend billions. In fact, the video showed last week or 2 weeks ago, talked about this. We spend billions looking for life. Understand, you know why we're sending probes to Mars? Think about it. Or even to some of the moons around Jupiter. You know, we're looking for water. We're looking for signs of life. I don't think, biblically speaking, the earth is unique. Nothing like it in the universe. I don't think they're ever going to find any life, certainly not intelligent life anywhere else. We spend billions looking for other life, and we are not aware of the very miracle that we're here at all. Yet the Bible has accurately described our world and universe. Things that we did not understand in the Bible for centuries are now becoming clear. Popular science over 500 years ago thought that the earth was flat, you know, was held up by big elephants or Atlas. We have these things. Isaiah 40, verse 22, it says, it is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers who stretch out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. Circle of the earth, and when you get into the Hebrew, it talks about a dome or a sphere is the word that's used in the Hebrew here. And it's from the Hebrew word khun, K-H-U-N, and it means dome or roundness. Isaiah was written 2,700 years ago. And up until about 500 years ago, educated men believed the earth was flat. Different myths abound. They thought it was like a table, like a drum. Greeks thought that Atlas held it on his shoulders. You know, we have flat earthers today, and I don't understand them. You know, what is underneath the earth? I mean, what's holding it up? And it's interesting how the Bible describes certain things. In Psalms 103, verse 12, it says, "As far as the east is from the west, so far he has removed our transgression from us." I want you to think about that. Why did the psalmist say east from the west? Why didn't he say north from the south? Why? No, hang on. I brought my handy-dandy training aid with me. Think about it. On the earth, if you were to go east, how far do you have to go east to reach west? You keep going forever. The reverse is true. You can go west forever, and you'll never hit east. But if you were to go north, go due north, at some point you're going to hit the North Pole, okay? You follow me there? After you cross over the North Pole, which way are you heading? South. And you keep going south until you hit where? South Pole. And then you're what? Heading north again. You know, isn't it interesting that they said as far as the east is from the north? I mean, east is from the west, not the north and the south. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? And the earth rotating is another misconception. Many thought the earth was the center of the universe. You know, we can look at it in the Milky Way. Understand, we're way out in the edge of the Milky Way. But what's interesting, you know, we're not in the center of the Milky Way. We're out in the edge. But we're in a perfect position, depending upon where the earth is in its orbit around the sun, to observe the universe. It's a perfect observation point. But that's neither here nor there. The earth rotating is another misconception. Many thought the earth was the center of the universe and that the sun rotated around the earth. But look at the stars. Look at the stars on a time-lapse picture of the stars at night. I mean, we were out camping here a couple weeks ago, and we looked out and we could see the Big Dipper. A few hours later, the Big Dipper had moved. And we're starting to lose the Little Dipper under the horizon. You know, everything rotates. Understand why the North Star doesn't move. It is so far away, it doesn't matter where the Earth is in its orbit or our rotation. It is so far away that it is the same relative distance. Actually, the North Star is moving. And it's moving a little bit where we can see a dither in it. Scientists can measure it a little bit. But for all practical purposes, it doesn't move because of its distance away. But yet everything rotates. This is illustration that the earth is rotating, and everything rotates because the earth is rotating. Job 38, verses 12 through 14. Remember what I said about the book of Job? The book of Job is arguably, and with a lot of good evidence, the oldest book, the first book written in the Bible. It is the oldest book in the Bible. Written, and whether it was written down a few hundred years later, but it had its origin around 2000 BC, where Genesis was written by Moses, give or take a few years, around 1400 BC. And so we look at this, Job 38, 12 to 14. Have you commanded the morning since your days began and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it? It takes on form, catch this, like clay under a seal, and it stands out like a garment. Now, what does it mean by that? When we go back, especially like to ancient Egypt, we go back to 2000 BC, and they say the way they do things, clay would rotate under a seal to make a symmetric design, just like the way the earth rotates around the sun. The seal makes its mark on the earth. Okay, and so this is the comparison. You can see the thing there where it rotates. Job 26, verse 7. He stretches out the north over empty space, and he hangs the earth on nothing. Do you get that? Can you see the ancients understanding the earth hanging on nothing? Can you see that? Can you see them understanding it's not hanging on anything? And it's taken a long time for people. Next slide there, David. Next slide. It took a long time to understand orbits. Everything in the universe rotates. Everything in the universe rotates. The earth is rotating around the sun. The sun is rotating around the Milky Way, and the Milky Way is moving around the universe. Now, understand, and this is, everything rotates because of gravity. Now, we talked about the cosmological constant of gravity. Science has yet to define what gravity is. They see what gravity does. They can measure gravity. They know the constants of gravity. But what is it? What is it? What is it that holds my feet to the floor? What is it? And we call it weight. We have measurements, but they can't define gravity. But because of gravity, we have rotation. We have rotation. If it weren't for rotation, the universe was not rotating. It would collapse in on itself. And God asked Job an interesting question. I love Job because, especially when it gets the verse, chapter 38, Job is wondering why all of these bad things happening to me. And then God comes down and he just merely asks Job a series of questions. One of the questions he asked in Job 38, verse 33, he says, do you know the ordinances? Laws, if you will. The ordinances of heaven, can you set their dominion over the earth? Do you know the laws of the universe? And you understand, we're only beginning only just now beginning to grasp what these are. We were, a couple of years ago, we were on vacation out in Arizona, Tucson, and we went to a place about 100 miles outside of Tucson called Kitts Peak. Anybody been to Kitts Peak? It's on top of a mountain. There's mountains that surrounds Tucson, so they don't have light pollution there. And they got an observatory on top there where they observe the stars, and we took a tour of it. And we were told about some of the measurements and discoveries that are being made today. And one astronomer science exclaimed that all our earlier thoughts and theories are wrong. Understand, things that we understand about the universe is constantly changing because why? We're learning more. We don't understand all the ordinances of heaven. We don't understand them all. We're starting to grasp a few of them, but you see, as measurements are taken, they are not coming out as predicted. Things are different. You know, we form a theory, then we test our theory, and when we test the theory, we're not getting the answers we expect to get. And so they got to go back to the drawing board and retake measurements and re-come up and refigure their theories. And many are scientists have come to realize they are wrong on a number of issues, and they're beginning to admit just how much they don't know. You know, the day, oh, we know everything. No, they don't. No, they don't. We're just beginning. We're just beginning to understand how much we don't know. Job 26, verse 11. The pillars of heaven tremble and are astonished at his rebuke. Thank you, rebuke. I'm sorry, I'm getting... The word pillars here don't refer to mountains, but rather to the laws of God that he has put in place to hold things together. And it's things such as the law of motion, the gravity, of magnetism. We're going to be talking about a lot of these things. And God asks, do you know the laws of heaven? And it is now known that our sun, with the entire universe, we are revolving around the galaxy, where the sun is moving based upon the center of the galaxy at about 481,000 miles an hour. Now, that will require over 200 million years to complete an orbit. But the thing is, we are moving. We can map it out. We can see what is happening. And we see this rotation. And at 64,000 miles an hour, the planet is carrying all the planets, including the Earth, through space towards a star cluster at the edge of our galaxy known as Hercules. But our galaxy, the Milky Way, is moving around the center of a supercluster of 2,500 neighboring galaxies at over 1 million miles per hour. Now, 1 million miles per hour, understand speed is a relative item. 1,350,000 miles per hour. Relative to what? Relative to the center of this cluster of galaxies. And the Earth motion relative to the universe has been measured at over 360,000 miles. Understand that varies as you go around the sun, because sometimes as the sun is moving around, our speed is more, our speed is less, depending upon if we're in that same direction. But there's so many dynamics in the motion of the universe. God has created a dynamic universe in which that is in constant rotating motion. And the purpose of the circular motion of all objects in space is to provide stability. The universe is stable. If the things didn't rotate, things would collapse in on itself. And if the Milky Way was stationary, the stars would move towards the center and the whole place would collapse. And then let's look at the stars. There are an innumerable number of stars. Can you count the stars? They don't know how many stars are out there. Genesis 15, verse 5, it says, then he, that is God, brought him, that is Abram, outside and said, now look towards the heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he says, so shall your descendants be. In Genesis 22, verse 17, he says, blessing I will bless you, multitude I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. Jeremiah 33, verse 22, as the hosts of heaven cannot be numbered, nor the sand of the sea measured, so I will multiply the descendants of David. With the invention of telescopes came the discovery of countless more stars. Scientists now estimate the universe contains at least 10 to the 26, that's a 1 with 26 zeros, 10 to the 26 stars in the universe. And they haven't finished counting yet. But what is interesting about this, this number is of the same magnitude if they were to guesstimate the number of grains of sand that there are on the earth. It is the same magnitude, not necessarily the same number, but the magnitude of the number is similar. And modern astronomical observation declares that there are no two stars are exactly alike. Psalms 147 verse 4 says he counts the number of stars and he calls them by name. Think about that. 10 to the 26, I can't think of that many names. I mean, and he calls them all by name. Psalms 8 verses 3 to 4, when I consider the heavens, your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained. What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you visit him. I remember being in places, and there are a few places that you can be on earth today where you're outside of light pollution on a cloudless night when there's no moon, and you behold the stars. You see the Milky Way, and you see stars. I remember being in Indonesia, and there was no electricity on the island of Seram, where I was visiting at the time, dealing with refugees that were there, but there was no electricity. And so there was no light. And I remember taking a little plastic lawn chair and walking to the middle of the field and putting it down and just sitting there and just looking at it all. If you ever took in such a sight, and many of y'all know, being a fighter pilot, the airplanes I flew, where I had the window seat, and it was 360 degrees of window. And I'm flying above the weather, which means I'm up at 30,000 feet with 20,000 foot of clouds between me and the ground, which means there's zero light pollution. And I'm above a good bit of the atmosphere, so I don't have any atmosphere disruptions. And I remember turning down my cockpit lights so there's no reflection on the canopy, and just, I couldn't take it in. It is amazing if you ever had such a sight. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you visit him. Any questions? Comments? I'm sorry I went a little longer than I wanted to tonight, but there is so much here, and as I've mentioned before, I'm just scratching the tip of the iceberg here. There is so much out there.
Snow, something like the stars.
Huh? Snow, yeah. There's no two snowflakes alike. Think about that. When we look at creation, and this happens by accident, I can't even fathom it. Next week, we're going to look at Harmony of Science in the Bible, Part 2. We're going to look at life itself and biology next week. Now, we looked at the physical world. We looked at physics tonight a little bit. We looked at the stars just a little bit. I didn't even get very deep into that. But we're going to look at life and biology next week. Next week. Let me close this out in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Lord, may we realize your word is literally true in ways and in depths that we can barely grasp hold of. Lord, speak to us through your word. May we feel your presence. And Lord, may we tell an unbelieving world what we have in Jesus Christ, who loved us so much that he gave his life on Calvary's hill. And Lord, that we have the hope of eternal life with you through his resurrection. Watch over us, guide us, direct us, protect us. And may Jesus truly be glorified in all that we say and do, for it's in his holy name we pray. Amen. Amen. God bless you all. You all have a great week. And thank you for those.